There's a fire inside you can't ignore. Stand still? Not a chance. You're a lifelong learner who's come this far. Now, we're here to help you keep going further. Capella University. What can't you do? Visit capella.edu to learn more.
Hey listeners, this is Peter and welcome back to the History Shorts, your daily, short-format, history-themed variety show and weekly conversation series with the leading voices in history today. Today's conversation is brought to you by thecollector.com, the ultimate online destination for anyone passionate about art, history, and culture. Beautifully curated, easy to read, and perfect for history nerds who want reliable, inspiring content without the fluff. Thecollector.com is just waiting to be discovered. Today's guest is one of the most influential historical storytellers of the last half-century, a man often called the master of alternate history. Harry Turtledove has built an entire literary universe by asking one deceptively simple question: what if history had gone another way? With a PhD in Byzantine history and more than 60 novels to his name, he's reimagined everything from Confederate victories in a civil war to aliens invading Earth during World War II to radically different outcomes of ancient and modern conflicts. His works, including The Guns of the South, the Worldwar series, and Southern Victory Saga, blend rigorous historical research with bold imagination in a way that few writers ever have. But what makes Turtledove so fascinating isn't just the twists, it's how deeply grounded his worlds are in real political systems, human behavior, and historical cause and effect. His stories don't feel like fantasy. They feel like parallel timelines that almost could have happened. Today we're going to explore how alternate history helps us better understand real history, how small moments can change the fate of nations, and what the past can teach us about the paths we didn't take. It is a pleasure to welcome to History Shorts author and historian Harry Turtledove. A quick word from our sponsors.
Why have we asked our contractor we found on Angie.com to be our kids' legal guardian? Because he took such good care when redoing our basement that we knew we could trust him to care for our kids, all 8 of them, should something happen to us.
Are you my dad now?
No, sorry, I do basements.
Connecting homeowners with skilled pros for over 30 years. Angie, the one you trust to find the ones you trust. Find pros for all your home projects at Angie.com.
Well, Harry, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So I always say you're like Neo in the Matrix. You bend history in different directions and away from our daily or learned reality. When did you catch the writing bug and the history bug? Was there a moment in your life where you thought to yourself, okay, this is what I want to be doing?
I first tried to write a novel when I was about 13. It was a science fiction novel. It was incredibly bad, as these things are. About a year later, I got interested in history because I picked up a copy of L. Sprague de Camp's Lest Darkness Fall at a secondhand bookstore. I think I paid 11 cents for it. This was a long time ago. And I read it, and I did not know anything. It's for those who don't know the book, it's a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court kind of story that drops a modern in 1939 when it was written. American archaeologist into 6th century Italy when the Ostrogoths are ruling the Italian peninsula and the Byzantine Empire is trying to reconquer it. And the archaeologist, Martin Padway, decides to help the Ostrogoths retain their independence. And I got fascinated by this stuff. I don't think I'd ever heard of the Byzantine Empire before. And I started trying to find out how much Sprague was making up and how much was real. And I discovered fairly fast that it was not very much and a whole heck of a lot, respectively. And I got hooked. Now, I wanted to be a scientist. I was a red hot science person along with being a science fiction person. I got into Caltech. I flunked out of Caltech at the end of my freshman year, I'm afraid, because calculus was much tougher than I was.
A
And,
different language.
yeah. And I spent a year at Cal State LA getting my GPA back up to the point where it was visible, A, to my naked eye, and B, to my draft board's naked eye, which was a relevant consideration because the year in question was 1967-68. Large, slow, clumsy, not extremely strong. I would not have made an ideal soldier, but I don't think they would have cared. I was also very nearsighted, just, to add on a little bit. Uh, and I ended up at UCLA and I got my bachelor's in history. I got my master's in history and I got my PhD in Byzantine history. You want fries with that? I had managed to make myself over the course of my 20s one of the least employable human beings on the planet. My mom, she put up with me trying to write a novel every summer too, and that was pretty awful also. The other thing that was going on, I had passed my doctoral exams when I was writing my dissertation, and I gave the latest chapter to the fellow under whom I was studying, and he lost it. And he said, and this was back in the days before there were electronic files. He said, "You will have a carbon or a Xerox, won't you?" And I said, "No," which is a mistake. And I never made that particular mistake again after that. The chapter eventually turned up, but when I left his office, let's say I was disgusted. That will be a polite way of putting it. And I walked across campus with a friend of mine who was also in the Byzantine history program, and I was cussing a blue streak and going, "There's got to be a better way to make a living than this." And I pulled out when I got home, I pulled out a novel that I had been working on when I was an undergrad and had put aside to be a grad student. And I thought, if I can rework this and translate it into English, maybe I can sell it. And I did. And I wrote it in parallel with writing my dissertation, which made the dissertation take longer than it would have otherwise. And eventually I did sell it. And I was chuffed, to put it mildly. I sold a short story too. I thought, I can do this. While all this was going on, I was writing a dissertation and writing a novel, and my first marriage was going down the drain because I was writing a dissertation and writing a novel, among other reasons. I mean, I messed up a marriage in my 20s. I had help, I admit.
I mean, I assume that's such different writing. You're writing a novel and dissertation is such a different type of writing. Like academic writing is not on writing.
I tried to do my best to sound, you know, non-academic when I wrote academic prose, but I'm not going to deny that my non-academic prose back in the day had a fair bit of academic influence in it. The stuff all goes together. So that's how that happened, and I sold my first novel, and I taught for a couple of years at UCLA. A, just after my marriage blew up, and B, while the fellow under whom I had studied had a guest gig at a university in Greece. And while I was teaching there, I met the lady that I married in 1980 and that I'm still married to. So, I mean, there are certain advantages to the academic trade.
It worked out. It worked
Yeah,
out.
it worked out.
You once said that your book, the book that made you a household name, The Guns of the South, came about accidentally. Can you elaborate on that?
Uh, I have been friends for God, it's damn near 40 years now with another fantasy writer and person who went through and got her PhD and didn't get an academic job, Judith Tarr. And back in the 80s, before either one of us had email, we would write back and forth. And she did one of the things that writers do when they talk to one another about the business. She was pissing and moaning about the cover art for an upcoming novel of hers. And she snarled, "It's as anachronistic as Robert E. Lee with an Uzi, for Christ's sake." And I looked at that and I thought, I can do something with that. And I wrote back to her and I printed out the letter. And then I added a hand scroll PS at the bottom of the letter. Who'd want to give Robert E. Lee an Uzi? Time-traveling South Africans, maybe? If I write it, I'll give you an acknowledgement. And I wrote it, and she has an acknowledgement in there. You better believe she does. And that, and that is the book that let me take up my courage in both hands. And it took some, I think, because I was scared to death when I did it and quit my day job. And that was 1991, and I've been telling lies for a living full time ever since, and somehow I've been lucky enough to make it work.
You I love that, telling lies for a living. That's amazing. PhD in history, though. I mean, you have you're a historian. How do you think that influences the way that you choose your topics and then how you explore these points of divergence within these novels?
I think I choose the topics I choose because I was also, even before I was a historian or interested in history, a science fiction person, because alternate history, or at least the way I look at it, involves the same technique as extrapolation in any other kind of science fiction, but you do it on a different point in the timeline. In most science fiction, you change something now or in the near future, and then you look, well, what are the consequences of this change X amount of time down the line? But in alternate history, you look at something and you change something in the past, and you look at the consequences. You change something in the more distant past, and you look at the consequences either in the more recent past or in the present. If this change had happened then, what would the world later or now look like? And I think what having the historical training does for me is, or at least I hope it does, is that it makes my extrapolations maybe a little more plausible than they would be if I didn't have the training. The other thing it does is that I know how to research something. I know how to analyze sources. I have a pretty good idea of when somebody's lying to me, which is a useful thing to have. You know, I made a dumb little joke. I said, "I tell lies for a living," and it's a dumb little joke. That's all it is. And I put this when I got on Twitter, I put it on my bio. But anyway, I said, "I tell lies for a living." And when I get into Twitter brawls with these yahoos, they'd always seem to think that this is, some kind of a tremendous gotcha and admission that nothing I say, they are not extremely clear on the concept of fiction. Hello?
Yes.
Yeah.
And also, you never want to get in that rabbit hole with an internet troll because you'll
Oh,
never
I mean,
win.
block works very well.
Yes, that is true. I can imagine. You brought up a good point here too, because you said that your idea of coming up with stories for alternate history is grounded in the science fiction. And I think every science fiction author will tell you that, yourself probably included, maybe you agree with this, that science fiction is as much about the future as it is about the present in which it's being written in. Would you say that the same thing goes for alternate history?
I would say that all fiction, science fiction very much included, is not about the future at all, not about the past at all. I would say that all fiction is about the world the writer lives in, and that science fiction, alternate history, and historical fiction give us funhouse mirrors to examine the present in that we can't get any other way. And I think that that's what makes them interesting to me.
Can you give us an example of one of your works? I mean, they all do this, but can you give us one, I guess, the more recent examples of when you felt like that came across through your story?
Well, I've done an alternate history that came out last year called Powerless. The title comes from the Václav Havel essay, The Power of the Powerless. And the protagonist is this guy who runs a grocery store in the San Fernando Valley, where I happen to live, although it's not quite the same San Fernando Valley. In a world where Marxism, Leninism, Stalinism has succeeded completely as capitalism has in ours, where, you know, the Russians rule the roost and call the shots and all that good stuff. And he's looking for a little bit of elbow room in his life. And one day there's a propaganda campaign, and he's supposed to put a poster in the window. This is drawing on the text from the essay, and he gets this old chestnut of a poster, "Workers of the world unite," and he says, "I can't stand this stuff anymore." And instead of putting it in the window, he crumples it up and tosses it in the trash. And of course, it gets noticed. And of course, he gets in trouble. And he finds a way to get out of trouble. And the other thing that's going on at the same time is that on a larger scale, in the uh, People's Republic that is the West Coast of North America, the states of Washington, Oregon, and California, a reformist uh, leader comes to power who is modeled on Alexander Dubček and the Prague Spring of '68, and tries to create what he calls socialism with a smiling face. And the Russians put up with this for a while just to see what will happen, and then they come in and squash it. And that's what the story is about. Tried to wedge a little bit of freedom out of an unfree situation. And it doesn't always work, but maybe one of these days it will.
It's relatable, and that's what makes it readable as well. Do you have a favorite historical time period, or just maybe one that you've already done, but you really feel like you could get yourself lost in it?
Well, I mean, I've written a lot of Byzantine things. This is right what you know. This is what made me this is what made me a writer. In late '79, I thought, I'm going to tell a story, and it was based on a story that I had done when I was a teenager that dropped a couple of cohorts of a Roman legion into Fourth Age Gondor. I was writing fanfic, although they didn't call it that in the late '60s, you know? Uh, and I thought, well, no, that probably isn't a good idea to do. What if I drop these Romans into a world of my own creation? And I thought, well, what kind of world do I know? I certainly knew the world of the Byzantine Empire around the time of the Battle of Manzikert, when the Turks broke into Anatolia, and I set it there. And I strip mined the plot and a couple of the characters, but I do a good deal more about life, the universe, and everything when I was 30, which I was when I started, than I had when I was just turning 18 and tried to do it the first time. If I'd known it was going to be 4 books long, I don't think I would have done it, but I wrote them and I sent the first one to Lester Del Rey, and he bounced it. said, "No, I can't quite use this." He said, "But, if you want, and if you ever finish this thing, send me all of it." And 3.5 years later, I had finished the thing, and I sent it to him, and it languished for, oh god, 6 or 8 months, and then it was like 10:30 at night my time on the West Coast, and the phone rang, and I thought, "Who the hell is that?" And I picked it up, and it was Judy Lynn Del Rey, Lester's wife and, associate in the editing business, and she said, "Lester's gonna buy these." And there I was, with my mouth hanging open, sitting on the bed, I was about ready to crash, I had to work in the morning, and it's 10:30 at night. Who can I call? I mean, I told Laura, we'd just, she was I don't know what she was doing exactly, but, we'd had our first kid. Our first kid was a baby when this happened. That was quite a night.
Yeah. Your books explored these dark outcomes: Confederate victory, Nazi survival, alien disruption of World War II. Do you believe that imagining these evil triumphs scenarios helps readers better appreciate how and why real history maybe turned out the way it did?
I don't really think about that stuff at the top level of my head when I'm writing. I think, "Is this gonna make an interesting story? What can I do with it?" And that's really what I'm looking at. I mean, if you don't keep the person on the other end of the book turning pages, all else fails, you know? And I
Yeah.
think, if you make that person think a little bit, also, that's an asset. But if the person reads 5 pages and says, "No, I don't wanna go on with this," then you fail. No matter how brilliant you are, you have failed, and I try not to.
Someone told me that you need to keep your protagonist always in danger. Even in history, even when you know the outcome, keep him in danger throughout the book, throughout the story. So that way the people want to know what happens, what happens, what happens.
Oh, it works, and what one of the things that I would do a fair amount when I was writing door stoppers, which I do less of these days, is that I would have multiple points of view and shift from one to another so I could paint, you know, almost do a George Seurat and do paint with a little dot here, little dot there, little dot there, little dot there, and make a picture of it. And when you have multiple viewpoint characters, you can kill some of them off, which is of course, there are risks to this. One of my daughters was reading the Worldwar books with the alien invasion during World War II, and I killed off her favorite character, and she put him down and never picked him up again.
That must have been an interesting dinner that night at the house. How could you?
Yes. "You killed Bobby. How dare you?"
Oh, oh man. Have you ever started a story and then changed your mind halfway through where you wanted it to go?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it happens. I am not one of the people who rigorously outlines beforehand. I don't know where it's going a lot of the time when I set out. This does have its downsides, I ain't gonna lie. Uh, the World War books with the reptilian invaders, there are 4 of them. I was 2/3 of the way through the 4th one, and I realized, I have no idea how this is gonna end, which is a bad feeling to, I really didn't want to email my editor and say, "I don't know what I'm gonna do here." And I kept writing, and I managed to write my way out of it, but boy, I was worried there for a while.
Do you have a person that you bounce your ideas off of, or is this more of just like in your head until you get it out on paper?
A lot of it's in my head. I bounce ideas off Laura. Laura passed her doctoral exams, and then she decided that she would rather have kids than write her dissertation. So she has published 3 books herself. She's working on stuff. She is a Broadway expert. The books all time. 2 of them tie in very closely with Broadway musicals in one way or another. One is a novel, one is a Broadway quiz book. She's my number one editor, number one critic, and we have managed to do that without either of us coming to dislike the other because of it, which is one sign I think that we may be doing at least something right anyway.
Yeah, that's a success, I would say.
Yes.
What does Harry Turtledove do for fun? Like, do you ever read for fun? Do you have your favorite authors that you read? Do you watch TV?
I read for fun. I'm a sports nut. I'm a baseball stat geek. I have, over about the past 15 or 20 years, I have discovered what most of the world calls football, you know. I read people, the one downside of being a professional writer that I've ever found is that you don't read fiction the same way anymore. You read it analytically and you have a lot of trouble turning off the critical faculty. And so I tend to go back to people who are better than I am. And there are, every writer in the world from Shakespeare on down had people that he or she was sure were better. That comes with the territory. You're never as good as you want to be. And I read a lot of Theodore Sturgeon, and I read Peter Beagle, and I read Samuel R. Delany, and I read Roger Zelazny, and I read Mary Renaud. And I read a lot of nonfiction because you don't read that quite the same way, or at least I don't.
See, for me, it's the opposite because I write nonfiction. I have a very difficult time reading nonfiction without looking at it analytically.
Okay, yeah, it's the same disease in a different place.
Yes. Yes. It's interesting because I mean, I write, nonfiction but I gravitate towards fiction. I mean, that's because that it almost like frees my mind. Okay. I don't have to like look at this person is avoiding this point of view. You're right. Like it's this bug in your head and you're just like, stop it. Enjoy the story. Enjoy the
Yeah,
story.
yeah.
Oh man.
I really cherish people, whose work I could just fall into, and there aren't very many of them anymore.
Hey, what are you working on these days?
I had last year a novel called Twice as Dead come out. It's an urban fantasy set in a Los Angeles just after the Second World War, uh, with the Central Avenue jazz clubs and corrupt cops, and oh God, were they ever, oh my Lord. But also with vampires and ghosts and like that. And it was enormous fun to write. And I've got another one, a sequel called Lightning Runes, coming out in April. And I've sold a couple more, and I'm working on another one.
Never stops.
No, I mean, this is what I do. I do it. Okay. I'm an old man, but I still have enough of my marbles to put words on paper and get somebody to give me a little bit of money for them. So I'll keep doing it. Keeps working.
Do you have like a routine when you write? Like, let's quiet the room down, put a candle on, go in this specific room.
I have a chair where I work down in the library. I am a primitive. I do first drafts in longhand, which for me, the benefit is, because I go back to typewriters, and typewriters were not user friendly. And when I was looking for a way to get things the way I wanted them to, very often I would have to retype a page several times. And I thought, that's a drag. And I would do it in longhand till I had it down the way I liked it, and then transcribe it, which saved a lot of retyping. And I thought, after a while, this is trying to tell me something. And so I do first drafts in longhand,
I love that.
and then, clean them up on the computer and see if an editor will pay for them.
Do you have binders of all these first drafts somewhere?
Oh, yeah.
That's amazing. Harry, this was truly an honor. I really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.